Hey, this is Laurie Mangold, and I'm here to do a skill builder on sewing 1/4 inch seams. Sometimes it can be a real challenge for us to sew and understand that after we've sewn 3 or 4 pieces together and we measure, we don't quite get the measurement we're expecting. And this definitely comes into play in our program called $5 Quilt, when everybody's striving to get that quilt block to be 12.5 inches and it's coming out 12 1/4, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And so today I want to talk about sewing accurate 1/4 inch seams and why that happens. And then we'll talk about, is it a major problem or not? So I'm going to have Michelle zoom in here on the machine. And what you want to pay attention to, it doesn't matter what machine you have, you've got to establish where the 1/4 inch mark is on your machine. This is just a basic machine. I've got the basic foot on here, and I'm going to pretend I don't have a specialty foot, because some of you may not be able to get a specialty foot. What we recommend is getting something. This is just a product called Guidelines. It's just got a little thickness to it, and it's sticky. And so when I determine where my 1/4 inch is, and if you have to, you can take the foot off and put your needle down or a seam gauge down and determine. But this machine has a mark right here. Notice it's like right in the middle of the feed dog. If I take this and I just put it straight, and if you want to run a straight edge out, I'm kind of eyeballing it, and put this straight down. The advantage of this is when you sew now, I don't have a specialty foot on. I've got these fun little pieces here that I'm going to sew. If I put these right sides together, and I can put my presser foot down, I can just keep the fabric against this little edge as I sew it. Oops, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Did I bump the camera?
Okay.
I can sew this in as I go, and it just keeps it guiding. It allows me to guide it nice and straight. So I'm going to do 2 more, and this is what we do when we chain piece. Okay.
That's another video.
That's another video. And I'm just going to line this up and continue to sew this in. Okay. Now, when I take it out, I'm going to determine if you're sewing a decent 1/4 inch seam, and I didn't bring one in, you can take a seam gauge and measure from here to here, okay? And you want it to be a 1/4 inch, and usually that's not the issue. Normally you get this down and you measure and it's exactly a 1/4 inch. What happens in quilting though is that we press our seams to one side, right? And you see that? And I'm going to finger press this. And this is pressed to one side. Now when we do that, we have this little ridge right here. And that works great for when we want to match seams. But when you are measuring from here to here to get your measurement, notice that there's probably 1 or 2 threads in that little lip right there. And this might be pressed a little better with an iron. Well, think about it. If that's even a 1/16 of an inch that's not stretched out, and you have 4 pieces and you lose 4/16 in your seams. 4/16 is a 1/4 inch, guys. And all of a sudden you've sewn 4 pieces together and your measurement across is shrinking little by little. And it's all resulting in this because of this little ridge right here. And so I know a lot of people will say, well, the heck with that. I'm just going to press my seams open and that'll eliminate that. And you're right. If you press your seams open, there's no ridge. And if you've got a good accurate 1/4 inch, you're going to get very close measurements. The problem with pressing seams open in quilting is that when you start pulling on them, when they're open, there's no fabric there. The only thing that is there is your threads. And if you happen to pop 1 or 2 of those, you're going to have a hole. And it's going to start to unravel. When you press things to one side, you don't have that stress when you pull on the seam. You don't have that opening, which is why in quilting, for longevity reasons, we usually press to one side as one of the reasons. So then you ask, well, then how do I make sure I'm sewing correctly? And there's this magic thing called a scant 1/4 inch, which is sewing 1 to 2 needle positions less than a 1/4 inch. You can set that on a basic machine with your seam, with a seam guide. You can also set it, I could just move this over just a tad and that would give me a scant 1/4 inch. You could also, if your machine allows you to move your needle over 1 position, you can do that, and that will give you a scant 1/4 inch. And as long as you're consistent in sewing all of your pieces the same way, when you go to put them together, they should fit, and then you should be much closer to the size you're aiming for. Couple other things that I want to mention before we talk about how important it is that there are lots of presser feet out there that are made. This one for Bernina is a 37 foot. They also have a 57. A 37 is a 1/4 inch. When I put this on, if I keep the fabric right on the edge of the foot, I'll be at a 1/4 inch. But it's kind of nice when, even with the 1/4 inch foot, to have this to help keep the fabric going in straight, if that makes sense. And think about sewing long strips. You can actually put another one of these out here, but it end to end, so you have a nice long guide to keep your strips going in nice and straight. The 57 foot already has a guide on it. So if you look, this has a little, so that you have something to run against. In the Baby Lock world, they also make one that has a guide on it. And they actually, both of these have a guide, and then they make one that doesn't have a guide. So if you get a hold of your machine manufacturer, almost all of them make at least a basic 1/4 inch foot, and some of them will have the guide. So that's an option too. So how important is this? Well, if I was going to take and make and sew small pieces like this, and I was going to put 20 of them together, and I'm losing a little bit in every one, I'm definitely going to see the impact of that in the finished size. As I said, as long as you're consistent, your pieces will go together. But if you're working on a group project and everybody's supposed to be turning in a block that measures 12 inches and yours measure 12 and a half and yours is measuring 12 and a 1/4, you might catch some grief. If it's for you, know that there are lots of ways to assemble quilts that allow you, like sashing. You can add sashing and cut your sashing a little bigger than it needs to be, and then trim your quilt block down, and your eyes will make that all look the same. Fabric is also pliable. If it's not way off, you can fudge it. You can make it work. That's not a problem. For me, the important thing is, yes, if I was going to be working on a quilt that I wanted to turn into a quilt show and I was going to have critique done by a judge, I definitely would want to focus and try to get a really accurate 1/4 inch seam. But quilting is my fun. It's my enjoyment, and I don't want to be so stressed every time I sew something because I'm slightly off and I'm wondering, is this a scan? Is this a scan? I find my sweet spot, I stay with it, everything goes together, and if my finished project comes out a little bit smaller or a little bit bigger than it was supposed to be, as long as everything's matching up and I'm happy, that's all that matters, right? There are no quilt police. So enjoy the process. But if you do strive to be an award-winning quilter, then you really need to master this. You really need to figure out where your sweet spot is and always sew that and make sure. And the best way to do that is to sew a whole bunch of pieces together and measure each as you go. And if I were to sew these two together, don't measure end to end because you can stretch. You want to measure the in-between pieces, and are they measuring what they're supposed to measure? And that's where you'll see if you're losing or not. Okay? So 1/4 inch seams, the big challenge in quilting is striving for that perfect 1/4 inch. But I'm here to tell you it should be fun, and it's okay. Even if you end up with blocks all different sizes, we'll find a pattern for you so they'll go together in a pretty quilt.